In the heart of a small American town, life moved at a slow and steady pace. Everyone knew each other, and most people lived simple lives, working, raising families, and helping neighbors when needed. Among them was Daniel Carter, a struggling mechanic who ran a modest garage at the edge of town. His shop was filled with worn tools, oil-stained floors, and the smell of gasoline. Work was never easy, and money was always tight, but Daniel kept going because fixing machines was more than a job to him. It was his calling. Despite his talent, Daniel's life wasn't glamorous. He often worked long nights just to pay rent. On the garage, customers came mostly with old cars and farm trucks, and sometimes they couldn't even afford to pay him in full. Many in town respected him for his honesty, but few really believed he would ever rise above his small, struggling business. One warm afternoon, something extraordinary happened. The ground shook with the sound of heavy blades cutting through the air. People in the town looked up as a sleek private helicopter circled above and then descended just outside Daniel's garage. It was a sight no one expected in their quiet town. The helicopter made a rough landing, the engine sputtering before it shut down completely. Out stepped a woman in her early 40s, elegant yet visibly burdened. Her name was Margaret Blake, a wealthy entrepreneur who had been living with a disability after a terrible accident. She relied on a wheelchair for mobility, but flying in her helicopter gave her a sense of freedom she could not find anywhere else. The aircraft was her wings, her escape from the limitations of her body, but that day her wings had failed her. The helicopter wouldn't start again, and the nearest professional aviation mechanic was hours away. The small crowd that had gathered whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads and muttered, "No way Daniel can fix that. Cars and tractors, sure, but a helicopter, forget it." Daniel himself felt a jolt of doubt. He had never repaired an aircraft before. He looked at the machine, its complex systems far beyond the engines he was used to. Yet when his eyes met Margaret's, he saw the worry and helplessness written across her face. She explained softly, "This helicopter is my freedom. Without it, I feel trapped again." Her words touched Daniel deeply. He had spent his life helping people with what little he had, and here was someone who needed him in a way no one else ever had. He wiped the sweat from his brow, grabbed his toolkit, and with a steady voice said, "I don't know much about helicopters, but I'll try. I won't let you down." At that moment, the town mechanic, who barely earned enough to survive, stood at the edge of a challenge bigger than anything he had ever faced. He didn't know it yet, but this broken helicopter would change not just Margaret's life, but his own. Daniel spent hours staring at the helicopter, its panels open, wires exposed, and its engine silent. He had never studied aviation mechanics, but years of working on cars and engines had taught him one important truth. Every machine, no matter how advanced, is built to run on principles of power, fuel, and connection. If something was broken, it could be fixed. While the townspeople doubted him, Daniel rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Margaret sat nearby in her wheelchair, watching with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. She could see the intensity in his eyes as he examined the parts, flipped through manuals he had borrowed, and carefully disassembled components one by one. Days turned into nights, and Daniel refused to quit. He slept only a few hours on a cot inside his garage, waking up to continue his work. The task wasn't just about repairing a machine. It was about giving Margaret back the one thing she cherished, her freedom in the sky. Eventually, Daniel diagnosed the main problem: faulty wiring in the fuel system and worn-out connectors that kept the helicopter grounded. With patience and determination, he replaced the damaged parts using a mix of aviation components he managed to order and creative solutions from his own garage supplies. Slowly, the machine began to come back to life. But Daniel didn't stop at a simple repair. He remembered Margaret's words about feeling trapped, even inside her helicopter. Using his creativity, he modified the seating and controls so she could fly more comfortably despite her disability. He installed custom hand controls that allowed her to operate without needing full leg strength. He adjusted the seat cushioning and added a few safety features to make her experience smoother and more secure. When he finally told Margaret the helicopter was ready, she could hardly believe it. The townspeople gathered once again, curious to see the outcome. Many still doubted. After all, Daniel was just a small-town mechanic with no formal training in aviation. Margaret wheeled herself to the aircraft, her heart racing. With Daniel's help, she climbed into the cockpit. He explained the changes he had made, his voice steady but full of pride. The moment she pressed the ignition, the engine roared back to life with a powerful hum. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Slowly, the helicopter lifted off the ground. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she rose above the town. She wasn't just flying again, she was flying with more independence than ever before, thanks to Daniel's modifications. The sight left everyone below speechless. When she landed safely, Margaret was overcome with emotion. She reached for Daniel's grease-stained hand and whispered, "You didn't just fix my helicopter. You gave me back my freedom." The townspeople, once skeptical, erupted in applause. They realized they had witnessed something extraordinary, not just the repair of a machine, but the triumph of compassion, determination, and belief. For Daniel, the struggling mechanic, this moment was life-changing. He had proven that true greatness doesn't come from wealth or titles. It comes from refusing to give up when someone needs you most.